Welcome to Threads of Truth, the podcast where real-life mysteries meet internet speculation. Today we're returning to one of Germany's darkest unsolved crimes, not to revisit the murders themselves, but to ask a haunting question. Did the killer already know the family they were about to destroy?
It's the ultimate true crime question, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when you consume a lot of these true crime stories, you really become conditioned to fear very specific things. You know, you fear the dark woods. You fear the unknown drifter passing through town.
Right, the stranger breaking the lock on the back door.
Yes. We build our entire concept of safety around keeping the outside, outside. We lock the doors, we draw the blinds, and we think we're safe.
Which is a fundamental human instinct, right? To look outward for danger. But environmental psychology, it teaches us something far more unsettling.
Which is what?
That the most absolute threats, they often completely bypass our external defenses. Because they don't need to break in. They are already inside the sanctuary. They're part of the landscape.
That is just a chilling thought. And I think that brings us perfectly to our mission for today's deep dive. We are exploring the 1922 Hinterkaifeck murders in Bavaria.
A case that has just endless layers to it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you spend any time on historical forums or Reddit, you have undoubtedly heard the ghost stories. You've heard all about the phantom in the attic.
The monster in the walls.
Right. But today, we want to look past a century of folklore. We are going to examine the physical, the spatial, and the psychological evidence left at that farmstead. We really want to determine if this was a random home invasion by a stranger or the ultimate betrayal by someone intimately familiar with the victims.
And doing that, it requires a complete shift in how we view a crime scene. We have to stop looking at the farm as just this static backdrop.
Like a stage set.
Exactly. We need to analyze it as an active participant in what happened. The architecture itself played a huge role.
So let's walk through that setting and really establish the reality of 1922 Bavaria. Picture this, right?
It's early spring.
We are about 70 kilometers north of Munich, just completely enveloped by dense, dark Bavarian pine forests.
Very dark, very isolating.
Yeah. The farmstead itself is called Hinterkaifeck, and it sits roughly 1 kilometer back from the nearest main village, which is Weidhofen. So this isn't just rural, it is aggressively isolated.
Yeah, the isolation was both geographic and psychological. The name Hinterkaifeck literally translates to behind Kaifeck, Kaifeck being a small nearby hamlet. So it was literally tucked away, bordered by those thick woods.
It's off on its own.
Right. And we really need to remember the socioeconomic reality of Germany at this exact moment. It's post-World War I. The Weimar Republic is struggling, to put it mildly.
Oh yeah, the inflation was starting to get crazy.
Exactly. The paper mark is beginning that slide into the hyperinflation that would totally define the era. And because of that, rural communities are incredibly insular. Trust is just a very rare commodity.
Everyone is looking out for themselves. And living in this remote, distrustful pocket of the world were 6 people. You have the patriarch, Andreas Gruber, who is 72 years old. His wife, Cecilia, also 72.
And their daughter.
Right, their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel. She's 35.
Yeah.
And Victoria's 2 young children, 7-year-old Cecilia, who will by Sully, and 2-year-old Joseph.
And we also have to include the final victim in this, Maria Baumgartner.
Oh, man. Maria's story is just...
It's heartbreaking. She was 44 years old. She was the newly hired maid who had the profound misfortune of arriving for her very first day of work on the afternoon of Friday, March 31st, 1922.
Her first day.
Her first day. She stepped onto the property just hours before the violence began.
This is genuinely haunting to think about that. Just, Maria unpacking her meager belongings in her room, completely unaware of the environment she had just entered. Because this was not some idyllic, happy country home.
Got it all.
This was a profoundly dysfunctional sanctuary.
Yeah, Andreas Gruber, he essentially engineered a life of deliberate, extreme social isolation for his family. He demanded complete self-sufficiency and total control over every aspect of their lives.
I didn't want anyone else involved.
Exactly. But by creating that specific environment, he fundamentally altered the psychological dynamics of his own property. The farm operated as a sort of reverse panopticon.
Okay, a reverse panopticon. I know that the standard panopticon is it's that prison design, right? Where one guard in a central tower can see all the inmates, but the inmates never know exactly when they are being watched.
That's the one.
So how does that invert at a Bavarian farmstead?
Well, because the farm was completely cut off from the watchful, protective eyes of a surrounding community, that dense forest allowed anyone on the outside to watch the family with total impunity.
Oh, wow. I see.
Yeah, the Grubers were entirely exposed to the darkness, just operating out there in the clearing.
Oh,
While the tree line remained utterly impenetrable to them, they were the ones in the center, constantly visible to whoever was in the metaphorical guard tower of the woods.
that is a terrifying visual, just constantly being watched from the trees, especially when you consider they were already living in an absolute nightmare indoors.
The abuse was severe.
Yeah, the historical sources are very clear that the household was governed by Andreas's abusive, tyrannical grip. I mean, in 1915, both Andreas and his daughter Victoria were convicted of incest in the district court.
The Newburgh District Court, yes.
Right. And Andreas actually served a year in prison for it, and Victoria served a month. So this wasn't just a rumor, it was documented legal fact.
And the abuse was systemic. It was basically an open secret in the area. Neighbors were aware of it. There were rumors that Andreas locked his children in a cold cellar for days during the winter.
God, it's awful.
It gets worse. Reports even suggest a previous child, a girl named Sophie, may have died from his neglect or abuse.
Why didn't anyone do anything?
Well, the community wanted to intervene, but tragically they refrained because they feared that reporting him would only bring more violent retribution down on the children. He was that feared.
So it's literally a fortress built on secrets and fear. But in the months leading up to the end of March 1922, Andreas actually started losing his iron grip on that fortress.
The anomaly started piling up.
Exactly. The sources detail this creeping dread, a series of escalating weird events.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start 6 months prior to the murders. The family's previous maid, Gresens Reiger, she abruptly quits.
She doesn't just quit, she flees.
Right. She packs her bags and literally runs off the property, claiming the house is haunted.
And her accounts are fascinating because she reported highly specific auditory and spatial violations. She didn't just say she felt a bad vibe.
Right. She had details.
She heard phantom footsteps pacing in the attic directly above her bedroom. She heard whispers drifting down through the wooden ceiling boards. And she felt this pervasive, suffocating sense of being constantly watched.
She experienced the acute dread of knowing her private space was compromised. But of course, the locals just chalked it up to a terrified woman believing in rural superstitions.
Yeah.
Just ghost stories. But then, moving into March, physical clues actually start manifesting.
Things you can't blame on ghosts.
Yeah. Andreas finds a strange newspaper from Munich on his property. No one in the family bought it. No one in the area even subscribed to it. It was just left there.
Out of nowhere.
Right. Then a house key vanishes without explanation. Just gone.
And from a psychological profiling standpoint, those are classic signs of someone testing boundaries. They are mapping the territory. They're observing the family's reaction to these small incursions.
See what they can get away with.
Yeah.
But just days before the murders, it snows. And Andreas is out walking the perimeter of his property, and he finds a single set of footprints in the fresh snow.
The famous footprints.
Yeah. And they lead straight from the dark edge of the forest directly to the door of the farm's machine room. The lock on that door had been broken for a while, so it was just held closed by a wooden latch.
But here's the truly terrifying detail.
There were no footprints leading back out.
Exactly. The boundary had been officially breached. The entity, whatever it was, transitioned from a voyeur hiding in the woods to a resident within the architecture of the farm.
Okay, I'm looking at this timeline, and I have to argue a point of basic human survival here.
Wait for it.
If I find footprints leading into my home, and I hear footsteps above my ceiling, and my house keys are missing, I am alerting the authorities immediately.
Any rational person would.
It's like standing in your kitchen, listening to a blaring fire alarm, smelling smoke, and just deciding to sit down and read the paper.
Yeah.
It defies all logic. Why didn't you go to the police?
Well, it defies modern rational logic, sure, but you have to view this through the lens of Andreas Gruber's specific psychology. Look at his criminal record.
The incest conviction.
Right. He had served time. He was fundamentally, deeply distrustful of authorities. He did not want the police poking around his farm.
That makes sense. He had a lot to hide.
Furthermore, his entire identity was built on absolute, unquestioned dominion over his secluded kingdom. He was the ruler of Hinterkaifeck. To go to the police, to admit that his fortress had been breached by an outsider, was to admit a total loss of control.
Oh, wow. So it was an ego thing.
Largely, yes. His psychological denial, his desperate need to be the sole authority, simply overrode his basic instinct for self-preservation.
So his ego literally seals their fate. He stays quiet. I mean, he complains to a few neighbors like Casper Stegmeyer and Lorenz Schlittenbauer, mentioning a break-in attempt.
But he doesn't act on it.
Right. He actively refuses the offer of a borrowed gun. He claims he isn't afraid. Which brings us to the actual night of the murders, Friday, March 31st, 1922.
And this is where the layout of the farm becomes deadly. Because when we envision a home invasion, we usually picture chaos, right?
Yeah, kicked-in door,
Yeah.
shouting, frantic, scrambling around in the dark.
That is absolutely not what happened at Hinterkaifeck. The killer utilized the unique architecture of the farm as a mechanical trap.
So let's examine that architecture because it's so important. An art professor actually built a highly detailed scale model of the crime scene for a Reddit true crime community a few years back.
Oh, I've seen that. It's incredibly helpful.
It really is. They pulled from the 1922 probate records and police floor plans. And the model reveals something crucial. The barn wasn't a separate building across a yard, like you might picture.
Right, it wasn't detached.
No, it was physically attached to the house via the stable. It's all one long building. And the attic. It spanned the entire length of the structure with no interior walls whatsoever.
Which means unobstructed movement.
Exactly. You could enter the attic through the barn and walk directly over the living quarters without encountering a single physical barrier.
And that spatial flow, it dictates everything that happened next. On that Friday evening, the killer did not storm the house. They didn't kick down the front door. Instead, 4 family members, Andreas, his wife Cecilia, Victoria, and young Silly, were lured out of the warm house, through the stable, and into the dark barn.
One by one.
Yes, one by one.
Lured one by one. Which implies they didn't know they were walking into danger. Like, perhaps someone went out to check on restless livestock, didn't come back, and then the next person went out to look for them.
A deadly funnel.
Yeah. And waiting in the dark of the barn was someone armed with a highly customized, heavily modified farming tool. A mattock.
And the murder weapon is perhaps the single most defining piece of physical evidence in the entire case. We really need to understand the physics of it.
Explain the mattock, because I don't think most people use those anymore.
Well, a standard mattock is a heavy hand tool. It's used for digging and chopping thick roots. It features a flat blade on one side and a pick on the other. It's heavy, clumsy, in close quarters.
Okay.
But this specific mattock had been illegally acquired and rebuilt by Andreas Gruber himself. He had secured a protruding 8mm threaded screw onto the heavy iron head of the tool.
And he didn't do this for, aggressive gardening. According to witness testimony from a former farmhand, Andreas designed this modification specifically to slaughter pigs.
Right. It functioned almost like a primitive captive bolt pistol.
Which is incredibly grim. But it tells us so much about the killer, doesn't it?
Exactly the point. Because to use a tool like that effectively, you cannot just swing it wildly in the dark. You have to strike the animal's skull with incredible anatomical precision.
Because of the screw.
Right. You have to place your hand close to the heavy iron head to control the weight and aim specifically so that the 8mm thread penetrates the brain just enough to induce instant death.
Without shattering the whole skull.
Exactly. Without shattering the surrounding bone. It requires deeply practiced muscle memory.
And the forensic reports, specifically the autopsies conducted by the court physician, Dr. O'Mueller, show that this is exactly how the killer used it on the family.
They were killed in the precise manner of the pigs.
Yeah. Victoria suffered 9 focused precision holes to the right side of her skull. 9. Her mother, Cecilia, suffered 8. The skulls were incredibly preserved. They were not haphazardly crushed or smashed into fragments.
The killer struck in a measured, controlled manner.
In the pitch dark, pulling the screw out quickly so the tool wouldn't get stuck in bone when the victims fell.
Which tells us so much about the perpetrator. Because an untrained, frantic individual, say a burglar who just panicked, swinging a heavy iron farm implement in a pitch-black barn, is going to cause massive, chaotic, blunt force trauma.
They'd just be bashing wildly.
Right. They are going to hit with the broad side of the iron head, not carefully aim a tiny protruding screw. The forensic geometry of those skull fractures indicates the killer knew exactly how this specialized tool worked and possessed the muscle memory to execute the strikes flawlessly.
That is horrifying, just the clinical nature of it. But there is one devastating exception to that quick clinical death. Young Silly, the 7-year-old.
That part of the timeline is just exceptionally hard to process.
It is. The evidence shows she did not die immediately. She survived the initial attack for several hours. She was lying in the straw right next to the bodies of her mother and her grandparents.
In the dark.
In the dark. And she was in such extreme physiological distress, such terror, that she literally tore out tufts of her own hair in her death throes.
The sources detail that her final moments were exceptionally brutal because the killer eventually returned to the barn, discovered she was still alive, and smashed her mouth and jaw with an iron band to silence her screams.
Just brutal.
And then they inflicted the fatal wound by slitting her throat with a pocket knife.
And not just any pocket knife. It was a pocket knife that belonged to Andreas Gruber, a knife he carried in his pocket every single day.
Which forces us to consider how the killer obtained it.
Right, because if it was in his pocket,
it suggests an intimate proximity to Andreas. Either they pickpocketed him before the attack or they calmly retrieved it from his body immediately after he fell in the barn.
Just casually searching the bodies of the people you just murdered. And it doesn't stop there. After clearing the barn, the killer moves through that attached corridor, past the stables, and directly into the living quarters.
To finish the job.
Yeah. They found the sleeping toddler, Joseph, and struck him with full force right through the roof of his bassinet. Then they moved to the maid's bedchamber and killed Maria Baumgartner with a single blow while she was in bed. 6 lives just extinguished.
Now, in a typical robbery homicide, this is the exact moment the perpetrator flees.
Because the adrenaline is peaking.
Exactly. The adrenaline spikes, the violent act is complete, the threat of discovery is immense, and the singular psychological goal is to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the corpses. Run and hide.
But at Hinterkaifeck, the narrative takes this truly bizarre turn into what environmental psychologists refer to as domestic mimicry.
The killer didn't run, they stayed.
They stayed. For 3 or possibly 4 days, the killer lived in a house with 6 corpses. They didn't just hide trembling in a corner either. They integrated themselves into the daily routine of the farm.
It's almost unfathomable.
They went out to the barn, stepping right past the hay that was hiding the bodies to feed the livestock. They milked the cows at the proper agricultural intervals so the animals wouldn't suffer or bellow in pain and attract attention.
They entered the family's kitchen, cut smoked meat from the pantry, and ate the family's bread. They even updated the daily tear-off calendar in the living room, changing it to April 1st.
They updated the calendar.
Yes. Tearing off that calendar page was a specific morning ritual, usually performed by the head of the household. The killer assumed the role.
They also dealt with the family's watchdog. It was the yellow Spitz, known to be fiercely protective. Instead of killing the dog to keep it quiet, which you'd expect an intruder to do, the killer actually unclipped it, walked it outside, and tied it up securely.
That behavior, it speaks to a chilling level of psychological compartmentalization. To sleep under the same roof as your victims, to casually prepare a meal while surrounded by the deafening silence of a slaughtered family.
It's sickening.
It requires a mind that views those people not as human beings, but as objects that have simply been removed from the environment. The emotional detachment is profound.
And while they were playing farmer inside, they were actively maintaining an optical illusion for the outside world. An artisan named Michael Pluckle happened to walk past the farm on the night of April 1st.
Right, he saw the bakehouse oven.
He did. He saw that the outdoor bakehouse oven was fired up, and he smelled this awful stench, like burning rags. He was actually blinded by someone pointing a lantern right at him before he hurried away. And then, a few days later, neighbors looking across the snowy fields saw smoke rising from the chimney of the main house.
That smoke was a brilliant, highly effective piece of misdirection.
How so?
Because to the distant village of Weidhofen, a smoking chimney signaled warmth, routine, and normalcy. It was a visual lie written into the winter sky, assuring everyone that the Grubers were just going about their usual isolated business. Nothing to see here.
It wasn't until Tuesday, April 4th, that the illusion finally broke. Silly had missed several days of school. The family had missed Sunday Mass, where Victoria usually sang in the choir. The mail was piling up in the window.
The silence got too loud.
Exactly. Finally, 3 neighbors, led by a man named Lorenz Schlittenbauer, decided they couldn't ignore the silence anymore. They walked over to the farm, found the doors locked, broke into the barn, and discovered the bodies stacked under hay and an old wooden door.
And the moment that barn door opened, Hinterkaifeck ceased to be a private, isolated farm and became one of the most heavily scrutinized, endlessly debated crime scenes in European history.
Which brings us perfectly into the realm of internet theories and cultural interpretations. A crime scene this bizarre, with this many locked doors and hidden weapons, is prime territory for historical forums.
Oh, the armchair detectives love this case.
They really do. It bridges the gap between century-old police files and modern true crime analysis.
Well, when facts are this strange, human nature rushes in to fill the gaps with narratives, right? We demand an explanation that makes sense of the senseless. And there are several prominent theories that attempt to do just that.
So let's start with the most hotly debated suspect across Reddit threads and historical archives. The family acquaintance theory, centering squarely on the neighbor who led that search party, Lorenz Schlittenbauer.
He is always at the top of the suspect list.
And I look at the motives here,
Yeah.
and it feels incredibly compelling.
Schlittenbauer is a fascinating figure because he embodies proximity. He wasn't a stranger. He was deeply entangled in the complex web of the Gruber-Gabriel family dynamic.
Very entangled.
Yeah. After his first wife died, he began an intimate relationship with Victoria. In fact, he was widely rumored to be the biological father of the 2-year-old victim, Joseph.
And he wanted to marry Victoria. But Andreas, being the controlling patriarch who essentially viewed his daughter as his own property, fiercely blocks the marriage.
So you have a massive simmering motive.
A huge motive. Jealousy, a custody dispute, and romantic rejection, all tangled up with Andreas's tyrannical control.
Those are strong emotional drivers, absolutely. But it is Schlittenbauer's behavior after the murders during the discovery phase that truly fueled the suspicion.
Right, the stuff at the barn.
When he, along with neighbors Paul and Sigel, arrived at the farm on April 4th, they had to break into the barn to get inside. But immediately after discovering the first 4 hacked-up bodies, Schlittenbauer reportedly walked over to the main house, somehow unlocked the front door without any issue, and went inside alone.
Okay, stop right there. Because if I am Lorenz Schlittenbauer and I just found 4 violently mutilated bodies in a barn, I do not know if the killer is still inside the house.
Exactly. The threat could still be there.
Why would I calmly unlock the front door and walk into a potential ambush all by myself? And more importantly, how did he unlock it, considering Andreas had complained about a missing house key days earlier?
It's highly suspicious. His later explanation was that he went in alone to frantically search for his potential son, Joseph.
Which, okay, maybe as a father you panic.
Right. But while inside, he undeniably disturbed the bodies and severely contaminated the scene. And there's another detail that haunted him for years. In 1925, he was found wandering the ruins of the demolished farm.
Just hanging around the crime scene.
Yeah. When a local teacher asked him why he was there, Schlittenbauer allegedly commented that the killer couldn't bury the bodies deep in the barn because the ground was completely frozen.
That is a highly specific, very strange detail to offer up unprompted. It implies intimate first-hand knowledge of the soil conditions inside the barn on the exact night of the crime.
It does suggest intimate knowledge. Though, if we are analyzing this objectively, as a local farmer familiar with the freezing temperatures of that specific week, he could have merely been making an educated, deductive guess.
That's fair. Farmers know the soil.
But these inconsistencies, they dogged him for the rest of his life. He spent years fighting and winning, I should add, civil slander lawsuits against locals who openly called him the murderer of Hinterkaifeck.
I can completely see why the locals suspected him. But I want to pivot to a theory that frequently pops up on Reddit, which completely flips the narrative. What if the family annihilator wasn't a jealous neighbor, but the abuser already living in the house?
The Andreas Gruber did it theory.
Yes. Let me pitch this to you, because the psychology makes sense to me. We know Andreas and Victoria had a physical altercation the day before the murders, and Victoria actually fled into the woods for hours to hide from him.
We also know Victoria had recently withdrawn a large sum of money.
Around 700 gold marks, yes.
Hmm.
And she left it as a donation at the local church. So you are setting up a scenario of a patriarch losing control.
Go on.
I mean, think about it. Andreas is enraged that Victoria might be planning to finally leave him. Maybe she's going to take the kids and run away with Schlittenbauer. So he snaps. He systematically slaughters his family to maintain his ultimate control.
Okay. And then how does he die?
Well, according to this Reddit speculation, Lorenz Schlittenbauer comes to the farm a day or two later to check on Victoria, finds the massacre, discovers Andreas is the culprit, and kills Andreas in an act of brutal, poetic revenge.
It is a highly dramatic narrative, and it neatly explains the initial murders through the lens of established domestic abuse.
Right.
However, when we apply rigorous forensic logic to this theory, it completely falls apart.
Why? Why are we dismissing a theory that perfectly ties up the motive of an abusive father losing control?
First, we have to look at the autopsy results from Dr. Miller. According to the overwhelming majority of historical records, Andreas Gruber was killed with the exact same precision as the other victims in the barn.
With the modified Matic.
Yes. He suffered the same measured, focused blows to the skull from the 8mm screw. He didn't die in a desperate struggle or a sudden revenge attack. He was executed in the same methodical manner as his daughter and wife.
I do want to note, just because we're looking at multiple sources for this exploration, that there is one specific compilation of clues on a German historical website that claims Andreas died differently.
Oh, the pickaxe theory.
Yeah. It suggests he died from falling onto the tip of a heavy pickaxe, tearing his carotid artery, and that he actually had no holes in his skull. But Wikipedia, the Police Academy reports, and the primary autopsies all state all 6 were killed by the Matic.
So let us assume for a moment that the primary autopsies are correct. Even if we entertain the idea that Schlittenbauer killed Andreas in revenge-fueled rage, the post-murder behavior makes zero psychological sense.
You mean staying on the farm?
And the cleanup. If Lorenz killed Andreas to avenge Victoria, why would he meticulously hide the harder weapons? The killer went to extraordinary lengths to hide the Matic, the iron band, and the pocket knife deep inside a false floor cavity in the attic near the chimney.
Oh, that's right.
They were hidden so well they weren't found until the farm was completely demolished a year later.
That is a great point. A frantic, grieving lover enacting revenge doesn't spend hours pulling up floorboards to hide a customized pig slaughtering tool.
No, they'd drop it and run. Or call the police and claim self-defense.
Right. They definitely don't calmly go outside to burn blood-soaked clothing in the bakehouse oven, all while tying the dog up so it doesn't bark. You are absolutely right. It doesn't fit the profile of a spontaneous revenge killing.
The methodical hiding of the weapons points to someone who planned to survive, evade detection, and leave absolutely no trace. Not someone acting out of sudden retributive passion.
Okay, so if the forensic evidence dismantles the neighbor and it dismantles the patriarch, what about the classic true crime staple, the unknown drifter, the stranger theory?
Always a popular one.
Author Bill James wrote a book called The Man from the Train, where he theorized the killer was an American axe murderer named Paul Mueller, who supposedly committed the Villisca axe murders in Iowa and then fled to Europe, continuing his spree.
The parallels are easy to draw at a surface level, I'll admit. The slaughter of an isolated family, the use of the blunt edge of a farm tool, moving and stacking the bodies, the lack of an obvious robbery motive.
It mirrors the behavior of serial killers who stalk, peep, and escalate their violence.
It does. But does a transient killer actually fit the deep physical evidence at Hinterkaifeck? I struggle with the idea of a drifter staying to milk cows.
Yeah, that's the sticking point.
When you look closely at the granular details, the drifter theory weakens considerably. A transient offender, someone constantly moving to avoid capture, rarely takes the massive, prolonged risks we see here.
They want to be in and out.
Exactly. Would a stranger go to the extreme trouble of locating a complex, hard-to-find false floor cavity in the attic to hide weapons that didn't even belong to them?
And would a drifter take the time to unclip the family dog, walk it outside, tie it to the bakehouse, build a fire in the oven on a freezing April night, and wash or burn their bloody clothes?
Pluckle smelled those burning rags from the road.
The smoke was a massive beacon. A transient killer wants to be miles away before the blood is even dry. They don't hang out doing laundry and managing agricultural intervals.
The post-murder behavior points overwhelmingly to someone who had nowhere else to go or someone who felt a bizarre sense of ownership over the property.
Which feeds perfectly into why this mystery has endured for over a century. It spawned best-selling novels like Tana, documentaries, and countless internet investigations because it taps into our most primal, universal fear.
The horror of the attic.
The horror of the attic. It is the literal manifestation of the monster in the walls trope.
But at Hinterkaifeck, it wasn't a trope. It was a physical reality backed by evidence.
When the police finally searched the attic, they found a makeshift bed of hay. They found human excrement, showing someone had holed up there for an extended period without wanting to leave their post to use the outhouse.
They also found moved tiles.
Yes, roof tiles that had been deliberately moved to create a sniper's lookout over the approaching roads. And they found rinds of smoked meat scattered nearby.
It validates everything the previous maid, Kreisreiger, claimed. She wasn't experiencing a haunting. She experienced a cohabitation with a very real, very physical threat.
The killer was quite literally living above them.
Listening to their conversations, learning their routines, waiting for the optimal moment to strike.
It's so easy to get lost in the Reddit rabbit hole of axes, drifters, and angry neighbors.
Yeah.
But let's look at what happened when modern, disciplined investigators finally got their hands on this file.
The 2007 review.
Yeah, in 2007, 15 students from the Fürstenfeldbruck Police Academy applied modern criminal investigation techniques to the century-old files. They examined every angle. What did they find when they stripped away the folklore?
The 2007 review was exhaustive. While they ultimately decided to keep the name of their primary suspect secret out of respect for living descendants, a decision that frustrates many historians, honestly, their conclusion was unanimous.
And what was it?
They overwhelmingly favored an insider, someone intimately familiar with the victims, the layout of the farm, and the daily operations of the household.
Let's unpack the why behind that conclusion, because the evidence is staggering when you really lay it all out. We already discussed the weapon. The killer needed to know how Andreas Gruber modified his mattock, and they needed the muscle memory to use an 8mm screw to kill a human without shattering the skull.
Which eliminates most random strangers.
But what about the motive? Because the police initially assumed it was a robbery gone wrong.
That assumption was completely shattered by the physical evidence left behind. The investigators found massive amounts of wealth untouched.
To put this into the context of 1922 Germany, we are talking about nearly 100,000 marks worth of gold and silver left completely untouched in an unlocked wardrobe in Victoria's room.
Just sitting there.
Now, Victoria may have donated some money to the church previously, but a vast fortune remained. A drifter, motivated by financial gain, does not leave generational wealth behind to go rummage for smoked meat in the pantry.
The motive was definitively not robbery.
Then we must look at the dog. The yellow Spitz was notorious in the area for barking ferociously at strangers. Yet, on the night of the murders, no neighbors heard the dog frantically barking.
It was quiet.
Furthermore, the killer was able to handle the dog, move it, and tie it up outside the bakehouse. The dog was quiet and compliant because the dog recognized the person holding the leash.
These three pillars, the specialized weapon usage, the ignored wealth, and the pacified watchdog, they construct a solid profile of someone deeply embedded in the family's world.
But if the evidence points so clearly to someone local, why wasn't anyone ever charged? Why did the case go cold?
That brings us to the absolute tragedy of the investigation itself. The case was fundamentally ruined within the first 48 hours.
Ruined how?
The concept of crime scene preservation simply didn't exist in rural 1922 Bavaria the way it does today.
It's like trying to read a delicate, handwritten letter after it has been passed around a muddy football field during a rainstorm. The original text is completely obliterated by the footprints of the curious.
Exactly. When word spread on April 4th, the farm was swarmed. Dozens of locals, sightseers, and initial responders just wandered freely through the property.
They just walked right in.
They picked up items, they moved the bodies in the barn to get a better look, permanently destroying any spatial evidence or blood spatter patterns that could have indicated the sequence of the attacks.
And the kitchen.
Oh, people literally sat down in the victim's kitchen, found food in the pantry, and cooked meals for themselves while waiting for the police to arrive from Munich.
I am still trying to wrap my head around that. They cooked meals in the kitchen of a mass murder site.
It's absurd by modern standards.
By the time Dr. Allmuller, the court physician, arrived on April 5th to perform autopsies, he had to do it right there in the barn on makeshift tables surrounded by contamination. The forensic integrity of the scene was a total loss before the science even began.
And that profound lack of early forensic discipline allowed myths to take root. When concrete facts are scarce and compromised, legends grow to fill the void.
So let's use the forensic logic we do have to deconstruct one of the biggest myths of the case: the timeline of the attic.
This is a crucial point.
The popular narrative is that the killer lived in the attic for days or weeks before the murders, sleeping in the haybed and watching the family through the roof tiles.
But a critical reading of the evidence suggests a very different reality. We know that on March 30th, the night before the murders, Andreas Gruber conducted a thorough, paranoid search of the house, the stable, and the attic because he suspected a prowler.
He found nothing.
He found absolutely nothing. No haybed, no escape ropes, no move tiles, no hidden intruder.
So, if the attic was clear on Thursday night and the murders happened Friday evening, what does that mean for the timeline of the attic monster?
It means it is highly likely that the elaborate setup in the attic, the hay carpet laid down to muffle footsteps, the ropes tied to the beams for a quick escape, the moved roof tiles, the human excrement was all established after the massacre.
That completely changes the profile. So the killer didn't hide up there to prepare for the murders.
Yeah.
They holed up in the attic post-massacre to watch the road for the police.
Exactly.
They created a secure, elevated bunker where they could eat stolen meat and observe the surrounding landscape, all while the smoke from the chimney projected that illusion of normalcy to the village below.
It shifts the psychology from a creeping, hidden stalker to a completely brazen occupier. They took over the property and prepared defensive measures against discovery, utilizing the reverse panopticon to their own advantage.
They were now the one in the guard tower.
Watching the tree line.
Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway from this century-old nightmare. When you look at the totality of the evidence, the most disturbing element isn't the violence itself.
It's the aftermath.
Yeah, it is the sheer psychological detachment required to execute this crime and then live in the aftermath.
The behavior goes beyond anger or greed. It was an act of total erasure. As one psychological analysis put it, it wasn't a crime of passion. It was an act of clearing the board.
Clearing the board.
The killer viewed Andreas, Cecilia, Victoria, Maria, and the two young children not as human lives with inherent value, but as obstacles that simply needed to be permanently removed from the environment.
And once those obstacles are cleared, the killer comfortably adopted their daily chores. They stepped over the concealed, mutilated bodies of a family to shovel hay for the cows. They inhabited the space of the dead with zero remorse, zero panic, and utter efficiency.
Which is the true horror of Hinterkaifeck.
You know, we lock our doors at night to keep the monsters out. We build fences and install alarms because we are terrified of the unknown stranger lurking in the dark woods.
The Hinterkaifeck forces us to confront a much darker reality.
It forces us to realize that familiarity can sometimes be far more frightening than the unknown. The most terrifying aspect of this case isn't the phantom pacing in the attic. It's the very real, grounded possibility that the killer was someone the family knew. Someone who looked them in the eye, shared their space, understood their routines, and seamlessly blended right back into the fabric of the community when the dark deed was done.
A monster hiding in plain sight.
Next time, we revisit one of the world's most famous missing child cases by reconstructing the critical hours of one evening in Portugal, a timeline where every minute still matters.